Beneath the blistering sun of the Valley of the Kings lies a tomb that still haunts science. It was supposed to be a triumph, the burial site of a god-king, untouched by time. But what they found was no divine warrior, no radiant child of Auric. They found a boy, barely 15, with a twisted spine, a crushed foot, and a skull shaped not by a crown, but by deformity. This was Tutankhamun, the boy pharaoh, a symbol of Egypt's golden age. But strip away the gold, and you uncover horror. CT scans showed he had a clubfoot. DNA showed necrosis in his bones. He likely needed a cane just to stand. He had no heir, and he may have been in excruciating pain every day of his short life. Why? Because he was the child of incest, a union between brother and sister, ordered not by lust, but by law. A law that demanded pharaohs marry their own blood, to keep the bloodline divine. They made it diseased. Tutankhamun was not the only one. For generations, Egypt's royal dynasty believed their lineage came from the gods. But in trying to preserve it, they broke it. This is the story of the world's most powerful family, a dynasty that married itself into madness. If you enjoy watching and learning about history, make sure to like the video and subscribe to our channel. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. It's incredible how we can explore history together from all around the world. Long before Rome, before Greece, even before the Bible, Egypt had gods who walked the earth, or so they believed. To the people of the Nile, pharaohs were not just rulers. They were divine, the son of Ra-Dar, the living Horus, the bridge between heaven and earth. Their power came not just from armies or priests, but from blood, and that blood had to remain untainted. In their mythology, the gods married their siblings, Osiris and Isis, Shu and Tefnut, Nut and Gibeah. So too did the kings of Egypt. This wasn't taboo. It was law. Incest, especially between a pharaoh and his sister, wasn't seen as perversion. It was sacred continuity. Take Queen Amos Nefertari, both royal and divine. Her son, Amenhotep I, ruled as a god. To ensure his own children were as divine as he likely married a half-sister. And then came Akhenaten and Nefertiti, the so-called heretic king and his queen. Both descended from generations of intermarriage. To the outside world it looked glorious. Golden thrones, towering statues, hymns to the sun god Aten. But under the surface, a biological time bomb was ticking. In each generation, the gene pool narrowed. Mutations compounded. And the very blood they thought was holy became poison. Why didn't they stop? Because they believed this made them more than human. In a world without genetics, without medicine, religion was truth. And the truth was, gods marry gods, even if it kills them. The tombs of the pharaohs are built to glorify towering statues, gilded coffins, jeweled masks. But modern science sees something else entirely. A collapse written in bone. When Egyptian mummies were first unearthed, archaeologists saw splendor. But when CT scans and DNA testing began in the 2000s, the truth was darker and far more disturbing. Tutankhamun's body was a roadmap of inherited suffering. His left foot was twisted, a clubfoot. His spine curved by scoliosis. His skull elongated and deformed. He had no usable immune system, ravaged by malaria and necrosis. And his parents, they were full siblings. Tutankhamun wasn't a unique case. He was the inevitable result of a system built on self-marriage. The entire Inbred Dynasty, the most mysterious in Egyptian history, is marked by abnormality. Akhenaten, Tutankhamun's likely father, is portrayed with a long alien-like skull, narrow limbs, and full hips, traits mirrored in his children. Historians once thought this was artistic stylization, but DNA now suggests otherwise. This wasn't art. This was reality. The 2010 JAMA study, one of the most comprehensive genetic analyses of royal Egyptian mummies, confirmed what had long been suspected. Generations of royal incest led to catastrophic health conditions. And it wasn't just skeletal. Tutankhamun had no children. 2 mummified fetuses were found buried with him, both believed to be his stillborn daughters. This dynasty was literally dying from within. The collection of over 130 walking sticks found in Tutankhamun's tomb was once thought symbolic. Now it's seen for what it was: medical necessity. The boy couldn't walk unaided. A god, crippled by his own divine bloodline. This wasn't unique to Egypt. Across history, wherever dynasties closed their bloodlines, from European Habsburgs to Incan rulers, deformity followed. But Egypt's case was different. Here, it was not a mistake. It was policy. Inbreeding was encouraged, mandated, and glorified. And with every generation, the risk increased. The margins narrowed. The body paid the price. For all their gold, all their monuments, all their rituals, the pharaohs could not outrun biology. What they called purity, modern science calls collapse. And the bones still resting in royal sarcophagi whisper the same warning. A bloodline obsessed with itself will eventually bleed out. The golden masks, the towering obelisks, the statues of queens beside kings. But behind the grandeur stood a truth far darker. Royal women in ancient Egypt were not just wives. They were wombs, tools, sacred vessels conscripted into the machinery of divine blood. The myth said the gods married their sisters. So pharaohs followed suit, and their sisters had no say. Take Mutimwaya, mother of Amenhotep III. Little is known about her origins, but one thing is clear. She was selected to produce a divine heir. Her marriage? Strategically arranged. Her child? A tool for continuity. Love wasn't relevant. Consent wasn't needed. Lineage was everything. Or look at Ankhesenamun, daughter of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. She was likely married to her father, and then her half-brother, Tutankhamun died. Barely a teenager, she was shuffled between male relatives like a ceremonial object. Her name meant, she lives through Amun. But what kind of life was that? Historical records hint at desperation. Letters from the Hittites describe a young Egyptian queen begging for a foreign husband. Anyone but another blood relative. But the request was too dangerous. It ended in betrayal and assassination. Then there was Cleopatra. Centuries later, she revived the incestuous tradition, marrying her younger brother to protect her throne. Not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Even as the Roman world crept closer, Egyptian royalty remained trapped in its ancient ritual. Marry the blood. Protect the blood. No matter the personal cost. This wasn't intimacy. It was politics. This wasn't romance. It was dynasty. And for the women at the heart of it, it meant being born into cages made of lineage and law. They were crowned with titles like Great Wife of the Pharaoh. But underneath, they were sacrificial bodies, used to sustain a lie that divine blood was sacred, even if it broke them. There are few love stories in these records, but there are many tombs, many miscarriages, many daughters whose names we will never know. Erased from inscriptions, buried without memory, because their value was not in who they were, but in what they could birth. And in the end, the bloodline they served destroyed them, just as surely as it destroyed the kings. The physical toll of Egypt's royal inbreeding is carved in bone, but the mental toll, that's buried in the decisions of kings. Start with Akhenaten, a pharaoh unlike any before him. He erased Egypt's gods, closed their temples, moved the capital into the desert, and forced the empire to worship a single sun disk, Aten. To some historians it was bold reform. To others, it was the unraveling of Egypt's religious and political structure. A revolution driven not by strategy, but delusion. His statues show a man with elongated limbs, wide hips, a misshapen skull. His poetry praises the sun like a lover. He claimed to be both father and mother to his people. This wasn't just theology. It was mental distortion, perhaps genetic, because Akhenaten came from incest. And incest doesn't just damage bodies. It increases risk of cognitive disorders, depression, schizophrenia, especially over multiple generations. Now look at Tutankhamun, his probable son. A boy thrust onto the throne, crippled, sickly, and manipulated by court officials. He undid his father's religious revolution, not out of vision, but confusion. He died before 20. No heirs. No stability. Only chaos. Then came Smenkhare, a ruler so short-lived and obscure, scholars still debate if he was male, female, or both. Some suspect Smenkhare and Akhenaten may have ruled together, or even been the same person under different names. The records are fragmented. inconsistent, erratic, thought. Why? Because the dynasty was breaking. Their rituals said they were gods, but their minds said otherwise. This wasn't metaphorical madness. This was possibly inherited psychological collapse. Even Ramesses II, who came later and ruled with power, obsessively married his own daughters, more than 10 by some accounts, in an effort to control succession. It wasn't just about maintaining the bloodline. It was a paranoia embedded in the throne, a madness fed by tradition, fear, and divine entitlement. Imagine growing up in a palace where your father is your uncle, where your wife is your sister, where your daughter might be your queen, where every whisper is sacred, every decision divine, and no one ever tells you, no, that's not holiness. That's a pressure cooker. And in the end, it exploded. The line descended into instability, short reigns, vanished heirs, political fracture. The divine dynasty, so obsessed with its own blood, couldn't think clearly enough to survive. The mind, like the body, cracked under the weight of worship. For centuries, Egypt's royal family claimed their blood was divine, untouched, pure and eternal. By the end of the 18th dynasty, that blood turned poisonous. Tutankhamun died without an heir. 2 tiny fetuses, mummified and buried with him, were likely his daughters, both stillborn. The line had failed to reproduce. A dynasty that ruled empires couldn't sustain life. No sons, no future, just silence in the tomb. With his death, the carefully constructed world of divine succession began to fall apart. The powerful god-kings, worshipped for generations, were suddenly gone. No royal son rose to power. Instead, priests filled the void. Military generals seized the throne. Foreign dynasties began to encroach. Egypt fractured from the inside out. The people had once feared the wrath of the pharaoh. Now they feared famine, foreign threats, and the instability that followed the collapse of sacred leadership. The divine myth was broken. The monuments still stood, massive, defiant, but the blood that built them had decayed into nothing. The dynasty's collapse wasn't due to conquest. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't plague. It was infertility. It was mutation. It was the final, bitter result of inbreeding. Their obsession with purity became their extinction. The last remnants of the royal line were scattered. Power was no longer inherited by blood, but by force. Egypt never again saw a family hold such concentrated, uncontested rule. The golden era had ended, not with a final battle, but with quiet, genetic failure. Even in death, the signs were clear. Tutankhamun's tomb, though famed for its riches, was modest compared to earlier kings. His burial rushed, his legacy forgotten for centuries. He was not remembered as a god. He was remembered as a warning, a symbol of how divine obsession, taken to its extreme, becomes decay. The pharaohs had built pyramids to touch the heavens, but in the end, they buried themselves under the weight of their own blood. And what was once sacred became a curse. The pharaohs did not stumble into inbreeding by accident. It was engineered, sanctified, weaponized. The idea of divine blood was no innocent belief. It was a system built to preserve control, not holiness. Priests, scribes, and royal advisors all upheld the illusion that pharaohs were gods in flesh, that only the blood of a god could rule, that only incest could preserve it. This was not about purity. It was about power. By marrying sisters and daughters, pharaohs eliminated political rivals. They concentrated land, wealth, and titles within a tight circle. No outsiders. No threats. No claims to the throne from competing families. The royal court became a closed circuit, an echo chamber of privilege and delusion. Temple inscriptions reinforced the myth. Propaganda carved in stone told the people, the king was born of a god and goddess. The queen is both wife and sister. This is the divine order. But these weren't religious truths. They were tools. Every divine title, daughter of the sun, wife of the living God, mother of the air, served the same purpose: to justify a system that placed women into incestuous unions and cloaked political strategy in spiritual language. The clergy, especially the powerful priesthood of Amun, benefited immensely. They aligned themselves with these royal unions. They preserved doctrine that protected the throne, and in turn, their own influence. In this theocracy, sacred purity was propaganda. To challenge the inbreeding was to challenge the gods themselves. To suggest the pharaoh was merely human and flawed was blasphemy. And so the myth lived on, century after century, even as bodies deteriorated, even as bloodlines collapsed. It became a lie no one could question. And like all great lies, it sustained itself through fear and tradition. But eventually, the cracks showed. The gods stopped delivering sons. The queens grew sterile. The throne passed into the hands of generals and foreign powers. And the lie, that incest was divine, was exposed by its own failure. Modern archaeology and science unraveled what the priests had hidden. The bones spoke. The DNA screamed. Purity was never holy. It was a cage, built not to protect the people, but to enslave them to myth. It would be easy to leave this story buried in the sands of Egypt, to treat the Inbred Dynasty of Pharaohs as ancient madness, something distant, irrelevant. But that would be a mistake, because what destroyed Egypt's divine rulers wasn't just biology. It was ideology, the belief that bloodlines make one worthy, that purity is power, that a lie repeated long enough becomes sacred. This thinking didn't die with Tutankhamun. It mutated. It traveled. Across the world, history repeats. European monarchies arranged cousin marriages for centuries, from the Habsburg Jaw to hemophiliac princes. Political dynasties today still pass power like inheritance, in names, in wealth, in blood. In some cultures, the idea of pure lineage still determines status, marriage, even humanity. And when ideology infects biology, we see the same decay. Not always in bones, but in systems. Eugenics, racial purity myths, cults of ancestry, genocide dressed as heritage. It all begins with a single, dangerous idea, that some blood is sacred, and some is not. The pharaohs believed they could perfect the world by controlling reproduction. They ended up extinguishing their own line. We still glorify them, the monuments, the gold, the mystique, but we often ignore the warning inside their tombs. Because this story was never just about ancient Egypt. It's about us, our obsession with legacy, our hunger for control, our willingness to sacrifice others, even family, for power. The tragedy of Egypt's royal bloodline wasn't just in its deformity. It was in its design, built to be divine, built to be untouchable, built to last forever. And it didn't, because no dynasty, no myth, no lie, no matter how sacred, can outrun the truth. Power without compassion becomes cruelty. Purity without love becomes rot. And when you worship your own blood, you bleed yourself dry.